Dr. Oliver sat on one of the benches in the workshop, watching Cletus crawl under the bonnet of his SUV. Mechanic, is this something that requires going under the car? Dr. Oliver asked from his seat. Oga, this thing is a major issue. I need to look at the engine first, Cletus replied. Dr. Oliver simply kept quiet. The confusion within him nagged at him, and he tried to suppress his curiosity. Cletus, who had gone under the car, crawled out slightly and called on one of his boys to bring him their box of tools. One of the apprentices carried over a box full of spanners, screwdrivers, hammers, and several other tools that Cletus used to fix cars. Dr. Oliver, seeing the heavy items being conveyed to where his car was parked, couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. Oga Mechanic, I'm asking again, does whatever is wrong with my car require this level of attention? It's not like I towed the car here. I actually drove it in myself. Cletus stared at the neatly dressed man and replied in a tone that not only failed to answer his question, but instead created more. Oga, if you don't want me to repair this car, just let me know so I can leave it. I think you drove it here and explained that something is wrong with it. Allow me to do my job, please. Dr. Oliver, now torn between his curiosity and the need to avoid disrespecting the mechanic he had commissioned to fix his car, sat motionless and watched as Cletus crawled back under the car with a big spanner. 3 hours earlier, he had been driving back from the hospital where he worked as a surgeon when his SUV started showing signs of malfunction. Since it wasn't his field, he had no idea what the fault could be. All he knew was that when he throttled the car, it didn't fire completely and, as a result, didn't run at the desired speed. He managed to drive slowly until he reached the mechanic's workshop. As much as he wasn't a mechanic, Dr. Oliver had a feeling that whatever the issue was, it required only a minor attention. What baffled him now was that the mechanic was attending to his car with the level of care given to a vehicle with a full engine problem. By his analogy, a man who walks into a hospital complaining of a fever probably just needs a few aspirin or malaria pills. Such minor attention was what he believed his SUV required at this point, not the full heart surgery that this mechanic seemed to be prepping his car for. Oga Mechanic, from the number of tools you have here, it looks like you want to open the entire engine. Please, can you tell me exactly what the problem is? I didn't anticipate a fault that requires this many tools. Dr. Oliver quizzed again, unable to hold back his curiosity. Oga, if you don't want me to work on this car, just say so and I will leave. Cletus almost shot back. But I just want to know first now. Listen, I'm a doctor. I tell my patients what their ailment is after carrying out diagnosis. That way, they understand exactly what we are dealing with. Oga Doctor, do you know what the problem with this car is? Cletus asked. No, I don't. If I did, I wouldn't have brought it here for you to repair. Dr. Oliver replied, slumping back onto the bench. Good, because this is not Dr. Something. When I found out what the problem is, I will fix it and you'll be able to drive out of here with your car, Cletus said, disappearing under the SUV once again. Dr. Oliver, laden with more questions, couldn't continue his inquiry. His curiosity and gut instinct kept telling him that the mechanic was not doing the right thing, and he couldn't shake the feeling. And yes, his gut was right. Even worse, Cletus was not only doing the wrong thing, he was intentionally doing the wrong thing. He knew that the problem with the SUV had nothing to do with the main engine, but being someone fraudulent in his work, he wanted to steal parts of the car before fixing the fault. In reality, The issue was likely just a problem with the spark plugs or fuel injectors, but he wanted to take advantage of Dr. Oliver's naivety and steal a valuable item from the vehicle. As was his usual practice, he first targeted the Kickstarters of unsuspecting customers. A typical customer might drive in complaining about something as simple as a faulty fan belt. Cletus would then exaggerate the problem, making the customer believe it was far worse. In the end, the customer would not only spend more money and time than necessary, but also lose an important part of their car, one that had no fault at all, to Cletus' thievery. Through his mischievous ways, he had stolen items ranging from car batteries, kickstarters, radiator fans, alternators, and headlamps, to even steering wheels. Once, he even made a bold attempt to steal a customer's full engine. However, the customer unknowingly saved himself by deciding he couldn't afford the outrageous cost Cletus mentioned and opted to tow his Toyota truck home instead. Today, Dr. Oliver was probably the next victim. You people just drive cars without realizing that a mere change in sound could mean catastrophe for the vehicle. Cletus muttered from under the SUV while busy unscrewing a bolt. Now, you want me to explain what you wouldn't even understand if I spend the whole day talking? Dr. Oliver, hearing this from where he sat, felt a tinge of humiliation. He had simply asked about his own property, and now this mechanic was making it seem as though he had committed a crime. Oga Mechanic, just do your work. Just get my car back to functioning properly so I can go home, he said, sinking back into the bench. The work on Dr. Oliver's car continued with Cletus loosening and tightening different parts of the engine. After what seemed like 3 hours, he finally walked over to where Dr. Oliver sat fighting sleep and demanded the key to the SUV. Reluctantly and tired, Dr. Oliver handed it to him. See, doctor, the mechanic started. It's not like I don't want to disclose the problem with your car to you, but it wouldn't do you any good to know what the problem is when my job is to fix it so you can drive home or back to your beautiful work. He rested against one of the pillars supporting the small balcony where Dr. Oliver sat. Personally, I believe fixing the car is what matters most. Some people come here and start telling me how to repair their cars, and by the end of the day, they only end up wasting my time. I always ask them, if you know what to do to fix the car, why bring it to my workshop in the first place? He chuckled, trying to sound jovial. Dr. Oliver, who was listening and beginning to understand the mechanic's initial attitude, let out a small laugh. I see. You don't like distractions when you are working. Exactly, Cletus replied. Once they can't answer that question, they keep quiet and I do my work. He laughed a little more. See now, I fixed your car's problem, he continued, gesturing towards the SUV. All I need to do now is test it to confirm everything is alright. After that, you send me my pay and drive home a happy man, he concluded as he made his way toward the car. Dr. Oliver, now feeling more grateful than suspicious, said, I'm sorry if I was too inquisitive earlier. It's fine, doctor. I get that a lot, Cletus replied before getting into the car and driving out for the tests. 20 minutes later, the mechanic returned. Dr. Oliver stood up as soon as he saw him drive in. How far? Is he picking up speed now? Doctor, all I can tell you is that this car is very fast. Everything is perfect. Cletus stepped out of the car and handed him the keys. I wanted to charge you more, but just pay 8,000 naira. That's too much, Dr. Oliver protested. Let me pay you 5,000 naira. How is it too much? You didn't even see the kind of work that was done on this car. The engine hub had to be opened and even the kickstarter. Cletus argued. You've been sleeping here, so you wouldn't know. The last price I will take is 7,000 naira, and that's me being nice. He sighed and added, It's not just a remove the plug or clean the injector kind of problem, doctor. Dr. Oliver, more overwhelmed with gratitude than ready to argue about the price, transferred the money to him and thanked him profusely before driving home. However, what Dr. Oliver didn't know was that it was indeed just a remove the plug or clean the injector kind of problem. All Cletus needed to do was clean the injector to improve fuel delivery and optionally change the plug. Even worse, Cletus hadn't actually worked on the Kickstarter as he claimed. Instead, he had removed the high-grade brand new Kickstarter the SUV came with and replaced it with an inferior one while Dr. Oliver was sleeping. He had also swapped out the car's original battery charger. Only after stealing these valuable parts did he finally do the actual repair. Dr. Oliver had not only overpaid for a job that wasn't as complex as he had been led to believe, but he had also lost expensive car parts worth hundreds of thousands of naira. Worse still, his car had been fitted with substandard, mismatched components that could lead to more issues in the future. As he drove home that late evening, filled with gratitude, he had no idea what had just happened to him. On Monday morning, Dr. Oliver resumed work as usual in his office at the hospital. He was sipping a cup of coffee when his friend Fred called, saying he was coming over to check in on him. Fred worked for an automobile company that specialized in car assembly. 30 minutes later, Dr. Oliver was entertaining Fred. The two had met at a patient's child dedication. Dr. Oliver had played a crucial role in safely delivering the baby, as the mother had multiple complications that could have proven fatal for both her and the child. Oliver, my man, how far? Fred, ever graceful and cheerful, shook his friend's hand as he settled into the visitor's chair. Bro, I'm good. Too many patients to attend to. I'm even lucky I haven't been called in for an emergency already, Dr. Oliver replied. Well, that's why we pay you big money, to keep us all alive while we party and enjoy ourselves, Fred joked. Don't get ahead of yourself, bro. Live life with ease. I've seen a lot in my line of work. People live very carelessly, I promise you, Dr. Oliver said. Oliver, please don't start with your doctor's talk. People like us can never be healthy enough around people like you. I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy yourself, Fred. I'm only saying, just be mindful of your health, Dr. Oliver clarified, gesturing to emphasize his point. All right, bro, Fred cut him off. Enough of your professional talk. Let's discuss something else. You guys never want to listen to professional advice from a doctor, Dr. Oliver teased, nudging his friend. All you guys care about is partying and driving exotic cars, especially people like you who can easily pick up any car you want in your company. You think it's that easy? Come and walk there and pick up any car you like then, Fred replied, almost laughing at the joke. Bro, you've driven like 3 different cars this year alone, and it's not even September, Dr. Oliver pointed out. I don't envy you, he added, though the white lie was obvious. Don't envy me, Supervising those boys in the assembly line is no small task. Everything must be according to specification, down to the very last detail, Fred almost cautioned lightly. Just like monitoring a patient's health, Dr. Oliver compared. A few bars off the normal measurement and it's a disaster. The two friends laughed lightly, recognizing the similarity between their professions in terms of attention to detail. A few seconds of silence passed as they continued drinking the wine Dr. Oliver had opened when Fred arrived. Speaking of my company, Fred began, we are looking for skilled technicians, 10 additional personnel to join my department. Really? That may be a bit difficult given that there are hardly any training centers in this city, Dr. Oliver said. Oh, Training isn't a problem, Fred corrected. They will be enrolled in a 2-week program to get them acquainted with the work. Dr. Oliver thought of Cletus, the mechanic who had repaired his car last week. Do you guys accept roadside mechanics? There is this guy who fixed my car last week and he did an excellent job. If you'd like a recommendation, I'd really recommend him. Wow. If you're recommending someone, I'd like to meet him. Fred was almost excited. We don't mind hiring roadside workers. I have a couple of staff who were previously roadside mechanics. Fred stood to leave but then asked, what was the problem with the car, by the way? Oh, he said it had to do with the Kickstarter somehow, but he was able to fix it perfectly. My car wasn't picking up speed as it should, and that was the issue, Dr. Oliver replied as he walked Fred to his Mercedes GLK. A Kickstarter problem? Fred seemed to consider the reply for longer than usual. Wasn't it just last year that you picked up that SUV from our retail office? He asked as he opened his car door. That was early last year, yeah, Dr. Oliver responded, unaware of where the conversation was headed. Fred, with his vast knowledge of car components, had immediate reservations when Dr. Oliver mentioned the Kickstarter. He already suspected foul play with his friend's car. Deciding to probe further, he asked, so, how long was it giving you issues before you decided to visit this mechanic? Just since that morning as I was headed to work, but it was in the evening that I went to the mechanic. Now slightly curious himself, Dr. Oliver continued. It took him some time, but he eventually fixed it. Should I have changed the Kickstarter entirely? The way you keep asking questions. No, not really, Fred replied. Just send your guy over. He might be more skilled than I expect. With that, Fred entered his car and drove off. As Fred made his way to his destination, he wondered if his friend Dr. Oliver realized that the Kickstarter in his car had a 7-year warranty. For an SUV less than 2 years old, it was nearly impossible for the Kickstarter to have developed a fault. That simply wasn't possible with a brand new SUV assembled by his team. For now, Fred needed more information, and the best way to get it was to keep his suspicions to himself, at least until the so-called mechanic was within his reach. The automobile company consisted of a small office area and 3 large assembly lines. The interviewer was basically Fred, assisted by one of his team leads. There were 5 candidates available for the interview that day, all of whom had come through recommendations. Mr. Cletus was the last one to be interviewed, and it turned out to be a rather short session. So, tell us about yourself, Mr. Fred asked. My name is Cletus Ekong. I'm a vehicle technician and run my own company. I did a part-time study at Federal Polytechnic Nekede. I have worked in my own company for the past 5 years and funded my part-time studies through it. I have experience with various car models, ranging from Toyota, Honda, and Mercedes. Most of my skills I have learned on the job. The interview continued with several technical questions, which Cletus answered convincingly. Fred and his colleague concluded that Cletus was quite skilled and knowledgeable in his work. However, one last thing remained, an assessment of his personal qualities and ethics. Additionally, Fred didn't want to rush into any actions based on his suspicions just yet. He wanted to strategically gather more information to confirm his concerns. Mr. Cletus, the work you'll be doing requires both professional and ethical qualities. That means we must remain honest in our duties, even when no one is watching. You already know that this job involves assembling car parts, inspecting and testing assembled vehicles, and everything in between. There will be times when you may need to dismantle and reassemble a car because, during testing, you realize that a part was wrongly installed or did not meet the required specification. These kinds of situations which are regular and expected, could demand extra time and commitment. It may mean that you won't be hanging out with your friends or leaving early on Friday evening because you must meet the day's targets. Tell me, do you think you'll be honest enough to report when a product has failed testing and requires additional attention? Without hesitation, Cletus replied, I would report that the product has failed the test and commit the time necessary to fix it. Fred, steering the conversation toward his objective, continued, would I be right to assume that you have never lied to your customers before? Or, at the very least, never told a major lie that amounts to outright deception? I have never lied or deceived any of my customers, Cletus said firmly, and I would never do that as part of your company. That's great to hear, Fred responded, nodding. Might I interest you in something, Mr. Cletus? Please, sir, go ahead. This job's starting rate is 1,600 naira per hour. There are additional benefits, including hazard allowance, housing allowance, health coverage, and other incentives that will be detailed in your offer letter if you get the job. But before we move on to that, tell me about an SUV that you worked on Friday 2 weeks ago. Fred had been subtly leading up to this moment, preparing to question him about Dr. Oliver's SUV. In the early part of the interview, Cletus felt confident. His responses were crisp, his experience undeniable. But when Fred mentioned an SUV from 2 weeks ago, something in his gut twisted. Why that particular car? His mind raced through countless repairs he had done until the memory surfaced like a buried secret clawing its way out. The doctor's SUV, the Kickstarter, the car charger. Cletus swallowed, maintaining a neutral expression. He couldn't afford to look nervous. Maybe it was just a routine question. Maybe Fred was testing his memory. I need to be sure, sir, which customer are you referring to? I work on several cars every day, he said, buying himself time. But Fred wasn't fooled. He chuckled slightly, noticing the evasion in his tone. A yellow SUV brought in by a doctor on a Friday evening. Just tell us what was wrong with the car and how did you fix it? Oh, I remember now, Cletus said, realizing there was no way to dodge the question. The SUV had minor issue. The customer, the doctor, thought it was a major problem because it wasn't his field of expertise. But it was mainly about the injector and spark plugs. The fuel injector wasn't delivering fuel properly, so it just needed minor cleaning, basic maintenance, that's all. He deliberately avoided mentioning the Kickstarter. Cletus considered bringing it up but ultimately decided against it. It was safer not to mention a part he had stolen, especially since he had no idea why this topic had come up. However, by omitting that crucial detail, he had just confirmed Fred's suspicions. Fred, having gathered enough information to act, leaned over and whispered something to his colleague, who immediately stepped out and returned moments later. Within minutes, 2 security personnel had been alerted and positioned outside. Fred then stood up, squared his shoulders, and stared Cletus directly in the eye. What about the Kickstarters that developed a fault? At this point, Cletus felt the tension in the room shift. This was no longer just an interview. It was turning into an interrogation. Sir, sorry, I forgot to mention, I also worked on the Kickstarter that was... You worked on which Kickstarter? Fred cut him off sharply, his towering figure looming over Cletus, his voice now stern. Are you aware that the Kickstarter in that car has a 7-year warranty? That means it is guaranteed to work efficiently for at least 7 years before requiring any attention. So tell me, Mr. Cletus, what are the chances that if we inspect my friend's car right now, we will still find the same Kickstarter it originally came with? Or is there a possibility that the Kickstarter somehow disappeared after you worked on it? As Fred's voice grew firmer, the two security personnel stepped into the room and flanked Cletus on either side. Minutes later, a car drove into the hospital where Dr. Oliver worked. It was Fred, accompanied by two of his workers. "Bro, is everything alright?" Dr. Oliver asked as he cleared them from the gate and let them in. "I'm afraid not, my friend," Fred replied, his face reflecting serious concern. His two men stood behind him. "Remember when you told me about fixing your car? I decided to do a little more digging. Now, if you trust me, I'd like my boys to take a look at engine parts of your car." "That's no problem, Fred," Dr. Oliver replied, handing the keys to one of the workers, completely overwhelmed by the seriousness of the situation. Fred gestured for his men to inspect the car while he continued explaining to Dr. Oliver. "I know, as a doctor, you may not have time to read and understand everything about your car, but that SUV came with several warranties. One of those warranties is on your Kickstarter. Remember how you mentioned that it had 4 the last time I visited? I doubted it because that Kickstarter has a 7-year warranty. I didn't want to alarm you, but I suspected that your so-called heroic mechanic may have played a fast one on you. Let's just say my visit, along with the inspection going on right now, is part of my final confirmation." "Sir?" one of Fred's workers interrupted. "The Kickstarter in this car is not the original company part. It looks like it has been replaced." Dr. Oliver's eyes widened in shock. "Jesus, seriously?" he exclaimed, rushing toward his car as Fred followed closely behind. "Also, the car charger has been replaced with an inferior one," the worker added, handing the car key back to Dr. Oliver. Fred turned to his friend, who was still frozen in disbelief. "Well, doctor, that confirms my suspicions." 2 hours later, Cletus was remanded in jail. The Kickstarter and the car charger were recovered, along with other brand new car parts during a police raid of his workshop. As Dr. Oliver and Fred left the police station that evening, Dr. Oliver turned back and gave Cletus one final remark. "You could have been a millionaire by this time next year, but your thievery cost you that." Sometimes a person becomes the architect of their own downfall, especially when they seek immediate gratification through dishonest means. Cletus would never have been able to sell the stolen parts for even half of their actual market value. Yet, his greed not only cost him a golden opportunity to earn millions, but also put him at a risk of spending a long time in jail. Hope you've learned something from this story. Please like and subscribe. See you in our next story. Bye.